People say your life can change in a single song, but nobody tells you that it can also change in the few seconds it takes to meet the right person. The first time I saw Noah Brooks, the music had already filled the school gymnasium. Colorful lights drifted across the polished wooden floor, and almost everyone around me looked like they belonged there except me. I had never planned to attend the annual school dance. Loud crowds were not really my thing, and I would have happily spent my Friday night in my dorm room watching movies instead. Unfortunately, my roommate insisted that college memories did not create themselves. So after 20 minutes of relentless persuasion, I found myself wearing my cleanest navy hoodie over a white t-shirt, standing outside the decorated entrance of the Student Activity Center, wondering why I had agreed to any of this. The moment I stepped inside, I realized I had underestimated the event. Strings of warm lights stretched across the ceiling, students laughed beneath colorful decorations, and a live band played upbeat songs while couples and groups of friends filled every corner of the room. The entire place felt alive. I held a paper cup filled with sparkling cider and quietly moved toward the side of the dance floor, hoping I could blend into the background until my roommate decided we had stayed long enough. That plan lasted less than 5 minutes. Someone bumped into my shoulder from behind, just as another student hurried across the floor. My balance disappeared almost instantly. The cup slipped from my hand, and I braced myself for what I assumed would be the most embarrassing fall of my first semester. Instead of hitting the floor, I felt someone catch my arm firmly but carefully. The movement was so quick that I barely understood what had happened until I found myself looking directly into a pair of calm gray eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was steady, quiet, and somehow completely different from the noise surrounding us. I nodded too quickly. "I think so." He released my arm only after making sure I was standing securely again. "Good." That was all he said. No dramatic introduction. No awkward joke. Just one simple word before he bent down, picked up my empty paper cup, and handed it back to me with a faint smile that disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. Before I could thank him properly, another student called his name from across the gym. "Noah." He turned toward the voice, raised one hand in acknowledgement, then looked back at me one last time. "Enjoy the dance." With that, he disappeared into the crowd as naturally as if the sea of students had simply opened to let him pass. I stood there for several seconds holding an empty paper cup, wondering why my heartbeat suddenly felt louder than the music. "You know who that was, right?" my roommate asked as he finally caught up with me. I shook my head. "That was Noah Brooks," he said with obvious admiration. "Senior. Film production. Everyone knows him." I glanced across the crowded gymnasium until I spotted him near the stage helping a faculty advisor adjust some lighting equipment before speaking briefly with a group of student volunteers. He did not look like someone trying to be popular. In fact, he looked like someone who would rather finish his responsibilities and quietly leave. Somehow that made him even more interesting. I told myself it was only one brief encounter, nothing more than a stranger helping another stranger for a few seconds. I had no reason to believe I would ever speak to him again. I could not have been more wrong because less than an hour later, the school photographer captured a single photograph that would quietly change both of our lives before the weekend was over. By the time the dance ended, I had almost convinced myself that meeting Noah Brooks had simply been one of those random moments that happened on a college campus every day. Students met hundreds of new faces every semester, and most of them disappeared into the background almost immediately. I expected the same thing to happen. Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine pouring through my dorm room window, and I spent most of the day finishing assignments before grabbing lunch at the student center. By Monday, life had returned to its normal rhythm. My first class started at 8 o'clock sharp, and after nearly getting lost twice while crossing campus, I finally found my classroom with less than a minute to spare. The familiar routine helped push the memories of the dance into the back of my mind, at least until my roommate suddenly nudged my shoulder while we were walking toward the library after class. He pointed across the courtyard without saying a word. Standing beneath a row of maple trees was Noah, speaking with two professors beside a table covered with film equipment. He looked exactly the way I remembered him, calm, focused, and completely comfortable without trying to attract attention. I quickly looked away before he could notice me. "You are pretending not to look," my roommate laughed. "I am not pretending anything," I answered, although even I did not sound convincing. We continued toward the library, and I figured that would be the end of another brief sighting. Instead, as I reached for the front door, someone on the other side opened it at exactly the same moment. I stepped back automatically. "Thank you," I said before realizing who was holding the door. Noah recognized me almost instantly. "You made it through the dance without dropping another drink," he said with a small smile. I laughed before I could stop myself. "Barely. That is still an improvement." His expression remained relaxed, almost effortless, making the conversation feel surprisingly natural. "Have a good day, Ethan." My heart skipped for a second. I had never told him my name. Before I could ask how he knew it, another student called him from inside the library. Noah simply nodded toward me and walked away between the bookshelves. I stood there for several seconds wondering what had just happened. My roommate looked at me with wide eyes. "Did Noah Brooks seriously know your name?" I shrugged, even though I was asking myself the exact same question. The mystery stayed with me throughout the afternoon until I remembered the name tags everyone had worn at the school dance. He must have noticed mine that night. The explanation sounded perfectly reasonable, yet somehow it still felt like there was more to it. Over the next several days, our paths crossed again and again in ways that seemed almost impossible to predict. I saw him outside the communications building carrying camera equipment with other film students. I noticed him quietly reading in the campus coffee shop before his afternoon classes. Once, he even offered his place in line when he realized I was rushing to make it across campus before a lab started. Every interaction lasted less than a minute, but every time we met, he greeted me by name as though we had known each other much longer. The strange part was not that we kept running into each other. The strange part was that each encounter left me looking forward to the possibility of the next one, even though I had absolutely no reason to expect it would happen. For the next week, it almost felt as if the campus had developed a strange sense of humor. Every time I told myself I needed to stop thinking about Noah Brooks, he somehow appeared somewhere in my day. Sometimes he was walking across the quad with a camera slung over one shoulder while talking with classmates from the film department. Other times I caught a glimpse of him through the glass walls of the media building, carefully reviewing footage on a computer with the kind of focus that made the rest of the room seem to disappear. None of our conversations lasted very long, but every single one left me smiling more than I wanted to admit. I finally decided that I needed to stop treating him like some impossible mystery. If we kept crossing paths, maybe it was simply because this campus was smaller than it felt during my first week. That explanation worked until Thursday afternoon. I was sitting outside the student union finishing a history assignment when my phone buzzed several times in a row. The messages came from classmates I barely knew. At first I assumed someone had posted notes from our lecture, but instead I opened a group chat filled with laughing emojis and surprised reactions. One student had uploaded several photographs from the school dance that had finally been shared on the university activities page. I casually scrolled through the pictures until one image made my thumb stop moving. There I was standing beside Noah only seconds after he had caught me from falling. The angle made it look as though we were completely focused on each other while the rest of the dance faded into the background. It was an innocent moment, but somehow the photograph captured it in a way that felt unusually personal. Before I could close the app, new comments began appearing beneath the picture. Some students joked that I had discovered the fastest way to become friends with the most respected senior in the film department. Others wondered whether Noah had finally become interested in someone after spending years keeping his private life almost entirely to himself. None of the comments were cruel, yet reading strangers speculate about a moment they knew nothing about made my stomach tighten. I locked my phone and slipped it into my backpack, hoping the conversation would disappear as quickly as it had started. It did not. Later that afternoon, while waiting in line for coffee, I noticed two students glance toward me before whispering to each other. When I entered the library, another classmate smiled and casually asked if I had enjoyed the dance more than I expected. I answered with a nervous laugh, but inside I wondered how one photograph had spread across campus so quickly. The strangest part came just before sunset. As I walked past the communications building, I noticed Noah standing alone near the entrance looking at his own phone. He looked up the moment he heard my footsteps. For the first time since we had met, his smile was gone. He slipped his phone into his jacket pocket and walked toward me with the same calm expression he always carried, but there was something thoughtful behind his eyes that I had not seen before. He stopped a few feet away and quietly asked, "Have you seen the picture?" I nodded once. Neither of us spoke for several seconds as students continued walking around us without paying much attention. Finally, Noah let out a slow breath and looked toward the busy courtyard before meeting my eyes again. "I think this is only the beginning," he said softly, and somehow those 7 words made the harmless photograph feel much bigger than either of us had imagined. Noah walked beside me for a few moments without saying anything else, and somehow the silence felt more meaningful than another explanation would have. Students continued passing between classes as though nothing unusual had happened, yet I could not stop thinking about his words. "I think this is only the beginning." The sentence echoed in my mind throughout the evening. By the following morning, the photograph had spread even farther across campus social media. It still was not cruel, but it had become impossible to ignore. Every new comment seemed to invent another story about 2 people who had shared less than 5 minutes of conversation. I tried convincing myself that if I simply stayed focused on classes, everything would settle down naturally. Instead, I found myself doing something I never expected. Whenever I noticed Noah across campus, I quietly changed direction before he had a chance to see me. It seemed like the easiest solution. If people stopped seeing us together, maybe they would lose interest. For 2 full days, I avoided the library entrance where we had talked before, chose a different coffee shop, and even took a longer path back to my residence hall after my afternoon classes. At first, I felt relieved. Then I realized something surprising. I actually missed those brief conversations. Late Friday afternoon, I finished a communications lecture and hurried toward the parking lot just as gray clouds gathered overhead. A cool breeze swept across the campus, carrying the unmistakable scent of approaching rain. I had almost reached the science building when I heard someone call my name. I turned around and immediately saw Noah jogging the last few steps toward me. He was slightly out of breath, but his expression remained calm. "You have been avoiding me," he said gently. It was not an accusation. It sounded more like an observation. I looked down for a second before answering honestly. I thought it might make everything easier. Noah glanced around at the students walking past us before folding his hands into the pockets of his jacket. "For who?" he asked. I opened my mouth to answer, but realized I did not actually know. Maybe I had been trying to make things easier for myself. Maybe I had been trying to protect him from more attention. Or maybe I had simply been afraid of becoming the center of conversations that I could not control. The first raindrops began landing on the sidewalk between us. Noah looked toward the darkening sky and smiled faintly. "Come with me." Before I could ask where we were going, he started walking toward the covered walkway connecting the media building to the Performing Arts Center. I followed without thinking twice. Rain quickly became steady, tapping softly against the glass roof above us while the rest of the campus hurried for shelter. We stopped beside a large window overlooking the courtyard where colorful umbrellas slowly filled the pathways below. Noah finally turned toward me. "I know people are talking," he said quietly. "They have done it before, and they will probably do it again. But you should know something." His voice remained steady, never rushed. "I was not avoiding you because of that picture. I was trying to figure out how to keep you from getting pulled into unnecessary attention." I looked at him in surprise. "You were protecting me?" He gave a small nod. Being noticed is not always as enjoyable as people imagine. For the first time since all of this had started, I realized the distance I had interpreted as indifference had actually been consideration, and just as I was about to respond, Noah's phone vibrated. He looked down at the screen, and the calm expression on his face slowly disappeared. Noah stared at the message on his phone for several long seconds before slipping it back into his pocket without saying a word. The rain continued tapping softly against the glass roof above us, filling the silence with a steady rhythm that somehow made everything else feel even quieter. I wanted to ask what had happened, but something in his expression told me he needed a moment to organize his thoughts first. Finally, he looked at me again and offered a reassuring smile that seemed smaller than the ones I had seen before. "It is nothing dangerous," he said. "Just another reminder that people enjoy creating stories before they know the facts." I let out a slow breath I had not realized I was holding. "Was it about the picture?" He nodded once. "Someone sent me another post. Now people are trying to guess why we keep running into each other." I could not help laughing awkwardly. If they only knew most of those meetings happened by accident. Noah smiled. "Sometimes the truth is less exciting than the story people want to believe." We stood there watching the rain for another minute until he suddenly changed the subject. "Are you busy tomorrow afternoon?" The unexpected question caught me off guard. Not really, I answered. Why? Our film production class is looking for volunteers to help organize equipment for an upcoming student showcase. It is simple work, and we could always use another pair of hands. I hesitated for only a second before agreeing. I would like that. The following afternoon, the rain had disappeared, leaving behind clear blue skies and cool autumn air. I arrived at the media building a few minutes early and found Noah arranging cameras, tripods, and lighting cases inside a spacious production studio. Several other students were already working together, creating a relaxed atmosphere filled with quiet conversations and occasional laughter. Noah greeted me with the same calm smile that had become surprisingly familiar. "Thanks for coming," he said. "I appreciate it." The next 2 hours passed faster than I expected. We organized equipment, labeled storage shelves, tested microphones, and prepared supplies for the showcase. Between tasks, we talked about classes, favorite movies, hometowns, and the unexpected challenges of adjusting to college life. I learned that Noah had always preferred working behind the camera because he enjoyed helping other people tell meaningful stories instead of placing himself at the center of attention. He admitted that being recognized around campus was something he had never really wanted. "People usually notice the finished project," he said while carefully coiling a microphone cable. "They rarely notice how many ordinary moments happen before everything comes together." His words stayed with me because they reminded me of our own conversations. Every encounter had seemed small by itself, yet together they had quietly become something I looked forward to each day. As we finished packing the last equipment case, another student walked into the room carrying a tablet. "Have you seen this?" he asked, showing the screen to several people nearby. Curious voices immediately filled the studio. Noah accepted the tablet, glanced at it briefly, and then handed it to me. My stomach tightened the instant I saw the image. Someone had combined our school dance photograph with a new picture taken outside the library earlier that week, placing them side by side beneath a caption suggesting that our repeated meetings could not possibly be accidental. I looked up at Noah, expecting frustration or embarrassment, but instead he remained completely composed. "People can guess whatever they want," he said quietly. "The only thing that matters is whether we allow their guesses to become our truth." I looked back at the screen one last time before locking it and handing the tablet back, and for the first time since all of this had started, I realized I believed Noah more than I believed the rumors surrounding us. The rumors did not disappear after that afternoon in the production studio, but something inside me had changed. Every new whisper seemed a little less powerful because I had finally heard the truth from Noah himself. He had never tried to create attention. If anything, he had spent every moment trying to keep unnecessary attention away from both of us. That realization stayed with me throughout the following week as campus life continued moving at its usual pace. Classes became busier, assignments piled up, and the student film showcase grew closer every day. Since I had volunteered to help with the event, I found myself spending more time in the media building than I ever expected. Noah was usually already there before I arrived, checking equipment lists, organizing production schedules, or helping younger students solve technical problems without ever making anyone feel embarrassed for asking questions. Watching him interact with everyone around him made me realize why so many people respected him. It was never because he tried to stand out. It was because he quietly made everyone else feel more confident. One afternoon, we stayed later than usual after finishing inventory for the showcase. Most of the other volunteers had already left, leaving only the soft hum of computers and the occasional sound of footsteps echoing through the nearly empty hallway. I helped Noah return a camera case to the storage room before we walked back toward the main editing lab together. "Can I ask you something?" I said. Noah nodded. "Of course. Why did you invite me to help with all of this?" He smiled thoughtfully before answering. "Because you look like someone who always wondered if you belonged somewhere." I blinked in surprise. Was I really that obvious? Only to someone who used to feel the same way. His answer caught me completely off guard. Until that moment, I had imagined Noah as someone who had always been calm, confident, and admired by everyone around him. The idea that he had once questioned where he belonged made him feel unexpectedly human. He leaned against the edge of a work table and looked through the large window overlooking the campus courtyard. "When I started college, I thought the fastest way to fit in was to become the person everyone expected me to be," he said quietly. It took me a long time to realize that pretending is much more exhausting than simply being yourself. I considered those words for several seconds before asking, "Is that why you stayed so quiet after the picture started spreading?" Noah nodded slowly. Rumors usually burn out when people stop feeding them. I hoped that would happen this time. Before I could answer, the door opened, and another volunteer walked into the room, carrying several printed schedules. "Bad timing," he said with an awkward laugh. Someone printed these with handwritten notes all over them. Noah accepted the papers and immediately noticed that several anonymous comments had been scribbled in the margins. None of them were openly hostile, but every sentence hinted at the same growing speculation about why he and I seemed to appear together so often. I expected frustration, but Noah simply folded the papers neatly and placed them on the table. Then he looked at me with the same steady expression he had worn since the night we met. "People can write whatever they want," he said. "What matters is the story we choose to live." As we left the media building together beneath the warm orange light of the setting sun, I realized I was no longer walking beside someone I barely knew. I was walking beside someone I genuinely trusted, even as I noticed a student across the courtyard quietly raising a phone as if preparing to capture another photograph. The next morning, I could not stop thinking about the student who had quietly lifted a phone in our direction the evening before. Nothing had actually happened, yet I had the strange feeling that another photograph would eventually appear somewhere online with another story attached to it. When I arrived at my morning class, I noticed several classmates scrolling through their phones before the lecture even started. Every few minutes someone smiled, whispered to another student, or glanced toward me for just a second longer than normal. A week earlier, I would have spent the entire class wondering what everyone was saying. This time I simply opened my notebook and focused on the professor. Noah's words stayed with me. What matters is the story we choose to live. That afternoon, I headed back to the media building to help prepare for the student film showcase. The atmosphere inside the production studio was much busier than before. Students carried lighting stands across the room, sound technicians tested microphones, and editing teams reviewed final video projects before the public presentation scheduled for the following evening. Noah stood near the center of the room, reviewing a checklist with one of the faculty advisors. When he noticed me, his expression immediately softened into the familiar calm smile that somehow made the busy room feel less overwhelming. "Perfect timing," he said. "Can you help me organize the interview stations?" We spent the next hour arranging chairs, adjusting camera angles, and checking audio levels. Working together had become surprisingly easy. We rarely needed long conversations because we had already learned how the other person approached each task. Whenever I finished something, Noah had already anticipated the next step. Whenever he needed an extra hand moving equipment, I was already walking over before he asked. It felt less like volunteering beside a senior student and more like working with someone who genuinely trusted me. During a short break, we stepped outside to enjoy the cool afternoon air. Autumn leaves drifted across the courtyard while students hurried between buildings carrying backpacks and coffee cups. Noah leaned against a railing overlooking the campus lawn. "You seem different," he said. I laughed quietly. "Different how?" "Less worried about what everyone else thinks." I considered the question before answering. Maybe I finally realized I cannot spend every day chasing rumors that change every hour. Noah nodded with quiet approval. "That is a lesson some people never learn." Before either of us could continue, a familiar volunteer from the production team approached carrying a folder of updated schedules. "Good news," she said. "The showcase is completely full tomorrow night. We even had to add more seating." After she walked away, Noah smiled. "That means today is probably the last peaceful afternoon we will have for a while." I smiled back. "Then we should enjoy it." We returned inside and finished the remaining preparations just as the sun began lowering behind the campus buildings. As students gradually packed their bags and headed home, I noticed one camera still sitting on a nearby tripod. Noah picked it up and reviewed the recorded test footage before pausing unexpectedly. "That is strange," he murmured. I stepped closer. Instead of showing only the empty interview area, the recording included several minutes of people entering and leaving the studio throughout the afternoon. Near the very end of the clip, a student briefly appeared outside the doorway, quietly raising a phone toward us before quickly walking away the moment the camera turned in that direction. Noah replayed the final few seconds once more, then looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "I do not think those photographs have been accidental after all," he said softly, and for the first time I realized someone might have been following our story long before either of us understood why. Neither of us said another word while the final seconds of the recording played again. The student in the doorway had only appeared for a brief moment, but it was enough to make one thing clear. Someone had been paying much closer attention to us than either of us realized. Noah stopped the video and calmly set the camera on the nearby table. "We are not going to guess who it is," he said. "Guessing creates more rumors. We stay with facts." I nodded, appreciating that even now he refused to let assumptions replace the truth. We packed the remaining equipment and locked the studio before walking across campus together beneath the cool evening sky. The student film showcase was scheduled for the next night, and the entire university seemed to be preparing for it. Posters covered bulletin boards, volunteers arranged directional signs, and faculty members hurried between buildings making final adjustments. The excitement around campus almost made it possible to forget everything else. Almost. The following afternoon, the showcase officially began. Guests filled the auditorium while students proudly introduced the projects they had spent months creating. I helped greet visitors near the entrance before moving backstage to assist with microphones and presentation materials. Noah coordinated the production team with the same steady confidence I had come to admire. He never raised his voice or rushed anyone. Somehow he managed to keep everything moving smoothly even when last-minute problems appeared. During a short break between presentations, Noah quietly motioned for me to join him near the side of the stage. "There is something I want to show you," he said. He opened the production tablet and displayed the official campus activities page. Another photograph had already been uploaded from earlier that afternoon. It showed the two of us carrying equipment across the auditorium together. Hundreds of students had attended the showcase, so taking photographs was completely normal. What caught my attention was the caption someone had added beneath the image before it began spreading through campus accounts. It confidently suggested that our repeated appearances together proved there was a hidden story everyone was trying to uncover. I looked up from the screen and sighed. It never stops, does it? Noah smiled faintly. People enjoy mysteries. The problem is that they often invent answers before asking questions. I handed the tablet back to him. "Then maybe we stop hiding from the questions." He studied my face for a moment as though making sure I truly meant what I had just said. "Are you certain?" I nodded. I spent too much time worrying about what strangers might think. I would rather spend my energy on people who actually know me. Noah's expression softened with quiet pride. "I was hoping you would reach that conclusion on your own." Before we could continue, one of the faculty advisors called everyone together for the closing presentation. Students gathered near the front of the auditorium while applause echoed through the room after each award was announced. When the event finally ended, dozens of people congratulated the production team before slowly making their way toward the exits. As Noah and I carried the last equipment case into the hallway, several students smiled and greeted us without mentioning the rumors at all. They thanked us for organizing such a successful event instead. It was the first time in days that I felt the conversations around us were returning to something real. Just as we reached the front entrance, Noah's phone vibrated again. He glanced at the screen, and although he remained calm, I noticed a spark of surprise in his eyes. He turned the display toward me. Someone had anonymously sent a single sentence along with a screenshot of another unpublished photograph. The message simply read, "If you think tonight was the ending, you have not discovered who has been writing your story all along." Noah and I stood beneath the lights outside the auditorium staring at the anonymous message for several silent seconds. The crowd from the showcase continued drifting across campus, laughing about favorite projects and making plans for the weekend, completely unaware that another mystery had quietly appeared on Noah's phone. He locked the screen and slipped it into his jacket pocket before looking at me with the same calm expression that had guided both of us through every unexpected moment since the school dance. "We are not chasing anonymous messages tonight," he said. "We have spent enough time letting strangers decide where our attention belongs." I smiled because I finally understood exactly what he meant. A few weeks earlier, I would have gone back to my dorm room and spent hours wondering who had written the message, what the photograph showed, and what rumor might appear next. Instead, I found myself looking around the nearly empty campus with an unexpected sense of peace. We began walking toward the central courtyard where strings of decorative lights still hung from the trees after the showcase celebration. The cool evening air carried the familiar sounds of students talking in the distance. And for the first time since all of this had started, it felt like the campus belonged to us again instead of to the rumors. "Can I ask you something?" I said. Noah nodded. "Anything." I took a slow breath before speaking. "Do you ever wish we had never met that night?" He stopped walking and looked at me with quiet surprise. Then he smiled, not the polite smile I had seen during our first meeting, but the genuine one that reached his eyes. "Not for a single second," he answered. That night reminded me that unexpected moments can become meaningful if we give them the chance. His answer made me laugh softly. "I almost stayed in my dorm that evening." "Then I am glad your roommate convinced you otherwise." We continued walking until we reached the open courtyard where everything had begun to change for me. Students crossed the pathways carrying backpacks and coffee cups just as they always had. Life around us moved forward without waiting for anyone's opinion or speculation. I realized that the rumors had never truly been the center of the story. They had simply been background noise surrounding something much more important. During the past few weeks, I had met someone who listened before speaking, stayed calm when others rushed to conclusions, and quietly reminded me that trust was built through actions instead of assumptions. Those lessons mattered far more than any photograph shared online. As we reached the edge of the courtyard, Noah extended his hand toward me, not dramatically or unexpectedly, but with the same quiet confidence that had defined every conversation between us. "Friends?" he asked with a warm smile. I looked at his hand for only a moment before accepting it. "Friends," I answered, knowing the word carried the promise of something deeper that neither of us needed to rush. We smiled as we continued walking across campus together, leaving the last echoes of the showcase behind us while another ordinary evening settled over the university. Somewhere, someone might still have been creating stories about us, posting photographs, or searching for hidden meanings that did not exist. None of that mattered anymore, because the only story either of us wanted to believe was the one we were writing ourselves, one honest conversation at a time. As we disappeared beneath the glowing campus lights, Noah's phone vibrated once more. He glanced at the screen, paused for just a heartbeat, and quietly slipped it back into his pocket without reading it aloud. "That can wait until tomorrow," he said with an easy smile. I nodded, completely unaware that the message waiting on his phone contained one final sentence that would change everything when our story continued. "The next dance will reveal the truth neither of you is expecting."